Hi everyone, it's that Friday feeling, which means it's not a crunchy morning, it's instead coffee and chat. I have a very, very, very badly produced cup of tea, which I might have to finish off while we're having a chat today. But I have with me a friend I haven't seen for some time, Fiona, and we have worked together, or at least tried to work together over a number of years. Usually at conferences we get together and make some huge plans on what we're going to do next, and then never quite manage to pull it off. And Stella, who we have spoken to on a number of occasions, usually virtually, but again have never quite managed to pull it off. Doing prep for this conversation was absolutely hilarious. So I, as always, go and have a look online and see who our guests are today and what I can find out about them. And I knew that Stella had published several books. So I went, oh, okay, I'll buy Neuroscience for Learning and Development and read that. So I sped read over the weekend, Neuroscience for Learning and Development. Very good read if you're an L&D professional. But halfway through this, she then mentions, webinar pocketbook. And I'm thinking, I've got that. It's on my desk.
Oh, you hadn't even realised.
I hadn't realised that it was you, Stella, so I had to dash away to go find it to make sure that I'd read both of them ready for today. So absolutely hilarious. Right, guys, couple of things from a housekeeping perspective. We keep this to half an hour, so at about half past, I'll wrap it up. If you have any questions for us, then there's a chat area. Just throw those into the chat area. I'll pick those up and throw them at both Fiona and Stella. I'm back in our office today, hence I have a very spooky, I'm not sure which way I'm going, cupboard behind me. I'm really hoping that nobody's not going to come out of that cupboard, but frankly, you never know these days. There seem to be some very strange occurrences going on in cupboards all over the world. So, neuroscience and change. A subject that both of you are passionate about. The sciencey bit at the front end of Neuroscience for Learning and Development, I must admit to go and click, I'm flicking over very quickly, Stella, but the remainder of it I loved. So what's it all about then? Why neuroscience and change? I'm going to throw it over to Fiona to start.
Okay, another book that I'd recommend on this topic is Neuroscience for Organizational Change by Hilary Scarlett. To me, the really exciting thing that really gets me passionate around this is that just that really simple understanding of a lot of the reactions to change that we have that sometimes we're a bit confused about. But when you start to understand what's actually going on up here, what are all the responses, what are the reactions of the brain, and even the very simplest thing that the brain doesn't like uncertainty, and the brain sees uncertainty as a threat. Oh, in this current situation, I think it really helps people start to understand all those feelings of anxiety that we have because we're in constant uncertainty. I think this is probably the most uncertain period I've ever had in my whole life, to be continually uncertain, and therefore your brain's just in that continuous anxiety mode. What about you, Stella? Is that how you see it?
Well, I think, your brain's in anxiety mode, but of course that actually affects your entire body as well. So It's not just your brain that's in anxious mode.
Yes.
Your body is you're feeling you're not sleeping well. You may be feeling lethargic, or you might be feeling kind of, highly agitated. So it's that whole, the impact on everything we are that this particular change is having. And it's so long as well. Change, you can normally see an end coming, but this one is really complicated because we just don't know what might happen. And you kind of, some days you feel like things are normal and you kind of, you're just plodding along in your normal mode, and then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, no, we are in a change. And I'm in a particular change because I changed countries at the beginning of the year as well. So I'm really struggling with change.
Yeah, no, but it is interesting, isn't it? Because people keep saying, I just don't know when the plan's happening. I don't know, that those negatives, which you don't normally hear constantly, are being reinforced again and again and again. And obviously there are changes happening and changes afoot. Even packing to come up to work, has now become a big rigmarole. So I've got to make sure I've got my mask, and I've got to make sure I've got my shield, to put on my head, and I've got to make sure I've got my hand sanitizer, and I've got to, it's like all this additional stuff, if whether I get in a car or whether I go into an office. You know, every time I go out of a room, I have to hand sanitize and then, you know, kick the door with my butt or with my foot in order to get through the door. It's just like there's a whole load of more stuff I've got to consider, I guess, as well. Is that part of it? Is that fight or flight piece that we would talk about, you know, in other areas? Is that where you're coming from in this neuroscience piece?
Yes, and I think that the big challenge is that fight or flight is triggered by change, by uncertainty, because that's what the brain doesn't really like. But the fight or flight is only meant to be a temporary response. So we get flooded with all these chemicals that give us all these physical feelings, and that should be a temporary thing. And then we get over that and we move on. But it's lasting, it's going on, that uncertainty and the continual change, because all the things you talked about there, who knows next week, that might all be different again. And for example, here in Leicester, so I'm based just luckily just on the edge, I'm just outside the red line, but my son is inside the red line in Leicester. So just when we thought it was all going to go back to a bit of normality, it jumps back again. And again, that's the brain kicking into that whole fight or flight, and it's the continuous, it's that that consistency at the minute of the uncertainty that's the really difficult thing for people to cope with. I don't think there's ever been a time of so much continuous change, and you don't know, you know there's more change going to come, but you don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So I was just going to sort of add to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
That in the neuroscience, you know, there's fight and flight, but there's also flock. So for a long time, because a lot of science is done on men, they didn't realize that there's actually this other tendency, which is to flock. So I think there's also some interesting stuff around people. For some people, they're actually finding this quite nice, because they are just huddled together in small spaces. They're not having to go out into the big wide world. I know a number of people who say, well, actually, I'm really enjoying it, because actually I'm spending more time at home. I'm spending more time with the people I really want to spend time with, and not necessarily having to go out into the wider world. So I think there's a slightly unusual element to it, that for some people, it's actually turning out to be a good thing. You know, people are working with their kids at home and they're saying, it's really nice, I get to see my kids.
Yeah. So you said, I noticed your LinkedIn profile, you said it absolutely isn't about the change curve, Stella. So if it's absolutely not about the change curve, what is it about from an individual and a business perspective?
Okay, so for me, the change curve it's an interesting model that a lot of people know for change, but it's been proven that it was first of all looked at in terms of bereavement, and there are many types of change that go beyond that, and also it was a very small sample, so it's kind of got rolled out. So I think it depends on how the change happens. So change that we take on for ourselves, actually for many of us, that can be, you know, really enjoyable, and whilst you're getting a sort of, you know, a different set of chemicals running, the cortisol, the dangerous parts, are not so bad when you've chosen the change, because actually it's very inspiring. I've been talking to a lot of people about curiosity recently. I'm curious, so you know, one of the reasons I've changed countries is because it's exciting to see what's new.
Where are you, Stella? I didn't know you'd changed country. Where have you gone
Belgium.
to? Have you?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I came from Spain. I went to Spain a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
for curiosity, and that, you know, that creates your dopamine levels. So if change is something that you've initiated, then actually that can be a really positive thing. Okay, you get the days when you think, I never knew it would be like this. But I think for me, it's, you know, change is often seen as a negative, and because of that curve that has been so well known, people always associate it with quite negative feelings. But actually, a lot of people see change and embrace it. So it's this, you know, your reaction to change and the stimulus. How did the change happen? And I think it's more to do with how resilient people are almost, and how they deal with what gets thrown at them and what they chose to do.
That's an interesting one, because resilience is often about, have I experienced something like this before? And in this particular case, the answer is no, I haven't experienced anything like this before. However, several months in, we are more experienced in this. We have more of an understanding of it, whether we're a correct understanding or not, we have more of an understanding of it. And I was talking to another training company the other day, and they were saying that their biggest challenge is it doesn't matter how many signs they've got around the place. It doesn't matter how many sanitizers they've got around the place. It doesn't matter they're asking people to wear masks or shields. Everybody after 5 minutes is forgetting, and you know, going into that I'm, you know, almost I'm completely safe and it's not a problem, and fairly obviously they're not, you know. So and that I guess is another challenge with it, because they've almost relaxed into the change. Do you think?
I think there's something there though about habit, because we're not used to wearing masks, we're not used to sanitizing our hands all the time. So actually, when you get back into a familiar situation, we're now asking people to deliberately change their behavior in an environment where they are feeling comfortable and feeling normal, and that's actually quite hard. So when we were in lockdown, because that whole environment felt different, it was actually easier to change your habits, because the whole environment isn't prompting you to do what you always used to do. Now that we're getting back to normal, the environment's become normal, so we just revert to old habits. So now we have to create our own change by trying to change our habits, and that's difficult.
So I guess that, you know, we're seeing the government using some, you know, quite kudo sort of statements, you know, with regards to trying to get us to remember things. You know, stay at home safe. The NHS was one of the early ones, obviously, but you know that more recently they've started to use different terms that are a little like when they tried to persuade us to use safety belts. It was click every trip. In order to reinforce that messaging, wasn't it? So is this part of it, do you think? Is it communication? Is it messaging? What do you think, Fiona?
I think communication is really important, and I think those kind of nudges through communication can be really valuable, those subtle nudges. But I'm not sure they've quite got it right. I'm not sure the actual the form of communication and the words that they're using are having, you know, you give the example of the clunk click. Yeah, that's that real quick, simple, and it totally resonates with you as soon as you're in the car, and it was very effective. But I think the stay alert and the 1 meter plus, there's a lot of confusion around the words that they are using, and I think that again is a bit of a challenge for people. And I think
click every trip.
Stella was saying about how change can be a great thing if you've initiated change. But I think that's one of the challenges, that there's not enough of this that we've initiated. But again, somebody who is resilient, you mentioned resilience, Kath, somebody who is resilient is more likely to initiate their own change and to actually work internally to make those changes. But the person who's not so resilient is a bit like, oh, I can't do it the way I used to do it, so I'm just going to give up now because I can't do it how I used to do it.
What were you going to say, Stella?
I was just going to say that the clunk click every trip was really, and it worked with what you were saying, Fiona, it was really consistent. You know, we can still remember it because it was repeated over and over. But these messages now are, we get one message for, and I'm not even in the UK, but I can, you know, I read the news. We get one message for 1 month, and then the next month it's changed. So you haven't even got time to learn those messages or get used to those messages, and they've got another one. So that kind of lack of time to even learn what you're supposed to do before the rule is now changed again. And again, you know, I think it comes down to habit and learning, that if you don't have the time, you don't learn something just by doing it or hearing it once. You have to have time and consistent processes to learn something.
Well, in neuroscience, that the brain's got to create those new pathways, isn't it? So that clunk click, because that clunk click was so reinforced, we still have that strong pathway that being of a certain age, we can all remember that without the brain having to think about it. But we're not. So
if you take that conceptually, you know, that there's, how do you reinforce that? How do you, you know, if I was a business owner, I am a business owner, and I need to reinforce that with both my learners and indeed with my staff, taking the messages that come in, whether they're good or bad, how do I get that change? You know, this is micro level change. This isn't a change project. This is a behavioral change that, you know, means I've got to grab my mask. It means I've got to wash my hands. It means, you know, I saw an advert the other day that said, now we've all learned the lesson about washing our hands. Maybe the next lesson we could learn is about putting rubbish in the bin. And I thought that was so appropriate, because we seem to have forgotten all of the things that we were doing on plastics less than 4 months ago. We were trying desperately to drive plastics down, and all of a sudden we're ignoring that. But how as a business owner, taking what you guys know about neuroscience, how does the business owner, how does the manager make those micro changes that you're suggesting? What do you think, Stella?
I think it's about creating, we use kind of a little model called CARS. So it's about creating cues that remind people.
Yes.
So if you leave everything the same, then people's brain is not triggered. So you need to create a trigger or a cue that says, remember to put your mask on. And that might be a notice, it might be an image, it might just be you have a set of masks hanging by the door, so everybody always picks a mask up as they're going. And it's like, you go into, so here in Belgium, you go into bars and restaurants, and the first thing you find as you get to the entrance to the bar is there's a great big thing of hand sanitizer. So you're prompted to do it. So the habit becomes easier because the trigger is there. You can choose not to do it, of course, but the trigger is there. So I think it's about creating triggers for people that then allow them to take the action that you want them to take, and then rewarding them for doing that, or giving, helping them reward themselves in some way for doing it. And keeping the message simple.
Okay, so we've almost gone into Pavlov's dogs here. If I hear a bell, then I'm going to go eat.
Yes.
That's a habit.
That conditioning of the brain. Yeah. And in terms of asking what you as a business owner, if we look at nudge theory, and the government has used nudge theory in the past, if we start to give those messages of 95% of people wear a mask in a shop, or most people in your area wash their hands 20 times a day, if we start to give those kind of nudge type messages, that's far more effective than the pointing the finger telling people you must wear a mask, you must do this, because we don't like to be told what to do.
No, but we do like to conform with what everybody else is doing, don't we?
But that's really interesting, isn't it? So I've just come back from the Emirates, Stella. So I was out of the continent even. I've just come back from the Emirates about a year ago, and one of the things I've noticed when I've been watching the Emirati leaders, the sheikhs in particular, is that they are all wearing face masks almost routinely. And we're not seeing that with our leaders, and even it doesn't really matter which leader we're talking about, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, or indeed England. I'm not seeing those leaders routinely in face masks whenever I'm seeing pictures out. So I guess that whole imaging, copy me, do what I'm doing, is also important, do you think, from a leader's perspective?
Totally.
I think that's a really good point, Kath. Yes.
Yeah. If you think of people being persuaded to do things, there's a number of routes that help people be persuaded. So they do what their friends do, and they also, or the people they like, but they'll also do what they see authority figures do. And we saw Boris Johnson when people were saying don't shake hands with people, keep distance. He was going around shaking hands, and surprise, he got COVID. They're not, you're absolutely right, Kath, they're not showing us what we need to do.
Yeah. Do you agree, Fiona? Is that the same sort of, is there more that we could do just from a human perspective at the individual layer that would start to reinforce? Because we're in this country, Europeans, British in particular, this is just, we've not got a habit of wearing masks. Before COVID came along, we looked at people who were wearing masks as if they were just a bit weird, putting it nicely. It was just not something that we did. And we were talking before we started about, I'm finding clients, I'm married to somebody who's deaf, and he really, really struggles without being able to see facial expressions. So he'll often lip read, and of course he can't lip read when somebody's got a mask on, which is why we've moved to shields. But is there more that we can do, as individuals that can help others around us? So we're going to mirror practice, but is there more that we can do in that space to help people through this change experience?
You can also help them in terms of sort of influence and getting them to change their behavior. It's another of the nudge tactics, is to commit to doing it. So maybe, as a business owner, you just pull everyone together and you say, look, you know, this is what we believe is the right thing to do. We should wear masks when we meet clients. We should wear masks when we're delivering our training, whatever it might be, and actually get them to say, yes, I agree to do it. You might even get them to sign to say they're going to do it, because once we've committed, made a personal stance, we're more likely to behave congruently with that, because otherwise we get that cognitive dissonance and we don't like that. So, you know, as a business owner, you could get an agreement from everybody that that's what they'll do.
Yeah, so it's almost building that team agreement. You know, and potentially, I guess, marginal gains comes into this as well. So, you know, you were saying earlier, Fiona, you know, that you comment about how much, I don't know, soap or hand spray or wet, you know, wet wipes. You know, please God, don't reintroduce wet wipes. But how many we've used in a week, a month, and that's to do with, you know, making sure that these things are actually reinforced. So I'm going to take this conversation on a little bit. We've mentioned resilience, and I've got a question in from Janet, who's asking a question, a really simple one, is how do we reinforce resilience? How does she build resilience in her team, and what's it going to look like practically? Are there hints and tips that she could apply that would build resilience, or is it down to the individual and there's not an awful lot that you can do to build it? What do you reckon, Stella?
You could definitely build resilience in teams. That's one of the things we're doing at Stella Labs. So getting people to be open and help them see that there are other options, and to help them to see that, you know, what's happening now that they're having to deal with isn't going to last forever. Teaching them that kind of open growth mindset can be useful, so that they recognize that from this thing I can grow, I can learn something new. And also I think focusing on, especially when we go through change, we tend to focus on the everything's different, but actually what's the same? Actually, for most of us, we still get up in the morning, we have our breakfast, we feed the cat, you know, you go to work, but maybe you're only going to work in your home, but what's the same? So that you can actually think, and it's about reducing what you were talking about, Fiona, earlier on. It's reducing the sort of fight, flight, and flock. Okay, so actually, most of my life is not so hard. So I can relax there, and then where are the things that I do have to look at differently?
So I think what you're sort of suggesting is it's a lot of this is about communication. You're building resilience by communicating to your people that, you know, it's I don't think you're suggesting I need to go out and buy a cat per se, but you know, it's what I have always done is still what I am doing now. Do you want to build on that still, Fiona?
I think open communication is massively important. It's that trying to clarify things to reduce some of that uncertainty. But I think something that Stella touched on earlier as well is positivity is such an important aspect of resilience, and something you can really do with your teams, even just on your team Zoom calls, for example, is really reinforce the positivity of the situation. What is positive? Because I've done this with a few teams. Start off a session by asking them to come up with one positive thing from being in lockdown. And it's amazing what people come up with. And they suddenly go, oh, well, actually, maybe it's not as bad as we thought. And then start to think about, well, what have you learned from this? And if you really stop and look at all the things that we've learned individually, it's been a massive learning experience. And I think these are important parts of resilience. The positivity, the open communication, connection with other people, make sure we ask for help and we keep that support going, and that we continually look for what are we actually learning, what are we taking forward from this. I think that's a way to help teams.
Yeah, many companies have dismantled or changed their HR function over the years. It's become something that is often now not embedded in an individual. It's often a general management function rather than a strand of the business. And yet the HR function used to be the one that did do that check-in with all staff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And support.
Yeah, and maybe this is a call to actually, you know, what other benefits did we lose when we lost that function within a business? You know, because it is a very different, you know, managerial task. Yes, of course, it's all about the people, but it's also about the task. and that makes it very different, doesn't it? So, if I was to ask you for a top tip from a resilience perspective, you've said, Fiona, communicate. Stella, what would be your top tip?
Move. Physically move, because if your body is active and healthy, that supports your brain. So for instance, here in my home office, I am actually sitting on a proper chair just so it doesn't freak you out, but I've got a desk that goes up and down, and I've got my normal seat.
Yeah.
So I'm physically moving, because we're not going out as much as we were doing, and maybe you can't get to the gym at the moment, but if we keep moving, that keeps our bodies healthier, and that helps our brains to function better, and reduces, burns up the adrenaline and cortisol.
So we're really thinking about the whole person now, aren't we? It has to be consider the whole person. And I guess we've talked previously on these sessions about the mental health of the workforce. It's making sure that just because it's not upsetting me doesn't mean that it won't be upsetting somebody else. So it's really understanding what makes that individual tick, what's good for that individual. So this concept of resilience, it's not really a package, is it? Although I appreciate both of you are teaching and training in resilience, it's not really a package that says, do this and you will become more resilient.
No, it's a whole broad range of different things.
And so much of it is about you looking after yourself, as Stella says. It's looking after your mental health, looking after your physical health, looking after your social health. So looking at those three aspects, and the more that we keep all those up, the easier it is for us to be resilient and do that bouncing back from the difficult situations. Definitely.
And I guess, it's the challenge, and we started by asking this question, is how long does this actually last? Because if we're all in this same position by the middle of November of this year, and it's cold and wet and dark and dreary, then it might be a completely, we're in a different space, aren't we? At least at the moment we've got light during the day and you can get out. So it is the length of time that I guess is involved as well. And people will change their experience over the next few months, depending on how strictly lockdown is released or otherwise, I guess. So anything else that we think, if you were going to come up with an advert, what would it be? But when we're saying that it needs to be short and snappy, it's almost impossible to suggest on the slide. But we need to be thinking about that communication piece. We need to be talking to our people. We need to recognise that each of them are doing things differently. Anything else that specifically from neuroscience that we need to be concerned about?
From a neuroscience point of view, I think it is in terms of resilience, trying to look for as many ways to minimize the threat response and put the brain into a reward response, like that being active and looking after yourself. Because the more that we're in the reward response, the easier it will be to deal with this whole situation, because our brain will function better, we'll be able to think properly, we'll be able to make decisions. And while you're in that whole threat mode, that all those things are really difficult to do. I think that's really important. Look for the rewards, look for the good things.
And do good things for yourself and for others, maybe by helping somebody else who's can't go and do their shopping. Or my sister's been really funny. My dad's very anti technology and anti Facebook and all those things, very nervous of it, but she's used Facebook to round up all the people, because he lives miles away from any of us. She's used Facebook to round up all the people in his village to say, look, my dad needs stuff delivering occasionally. Can you do it? Now, he doesn't know it's through Facebook. She's not told him, but she's been able to. So I think also using the tools available to us to support. And how would we do this now without the digital technology? It's amazing. I think,
it less than 4 months ago, most of us had no idea what Zoom was, apart from Fat Larry used to sing about it. But now we're all very competent on Zoom, less so on some of the other technology, although Teams is as good as in my book. But we have become far more capable in this area, haven't we, guys?
And we've cut down all that travel time.
Oh yeah. Although my days at the beginning of lockdown were longer by far. People seem to think that it was perfectly reasonable to get me working at 7:30, because that's the time I used to get on a train, and I'd work until 9, and I was dead at the end of the day. But things have have relaxed down a little bit now. Guys, I always promise that we're going to stop on the half hour, so it is coming up to the half hour. Thank you so much for your time. Really good to see you, Stella. I am so envious that you're going out for beer and mule later on, mussels later on. Oh, so envious. Everybody that's listening, we're going to take a couple of weeks break. We as a company have decided that we're going to take a summer holiday, so we're going to close down for at least a week, and I'm on my way to Scotland next week to do some key worker training. I know, Fiona. I'm going north of Edinburgh, so I'm very, very pleased about that. That'll be exciting.
I am envious of that.
We're coming back on the 7th of August to look at modern slavery. Very, very different topic, but one that has been in the news recently. The Boohoo case has underlined it. And we're going to be joined by Alison Hernandez, who's one of the Police and Crime Commissioners, who's going to talk to us about what this looks like. And then Mark Waterman, who used to be one of our close friends and colleagues, is going to help us explore, well, how does a contract manager, sourcer, look at this in the supply chain and what exactly happens next with it. Guys, really great to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully catch up with you soon. Speak soon.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.